You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of The Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden, a Southern Democrat.
And my name is Mark Reed, a West Coast Republican.
And together we are The Voice of Reason. For those of you tuning in for the very first time, this is a politically motivated podcast where civil discourse is the order of the day, where Mark and I find we have more things that unite us than we do that divide us. Now, normally I would toss the ball over to my co-host Mark, but this week I have the monologue, so I'm going to take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and going to jump right in to what one of the latest controversies that has been going on in recent days and is still going on today, and that is the tragic death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, caused by the Minneapolis PD. Death by black men at the hands of a white cop is nothing new. In almost every situation, my community, my people, are the first to shout racism. I don't believe every incident is a racist incident. I don't necessarily believe that what happened to George Floyd is a racist incident. Now, I know a lot of you are probably, your hair is caught on fire right about now based on that simple comment. I'm a Southern black man. I know what racism is about. Racism is when one race, usually in most instances white, believes that a minority, and we'll say blacks in this instance, are less than human. They're inferior. That is the basis of racism, when you're judging somebody based on the color of their skin, that you believe that they are less than you are. That is a very fine distinction between that and racial bias. Now, statistics have shown that racial bias, that whites, Caucasians, lead the pack statistically as far as racial bias is concerned. And I believe, especially in the police force, there may be a lot of racial bias. A lot of it is based on the fact that they believe that blacks in general are a greater threat to society. And so as a result, they deal with them harsher. That does not necessarily mean that they are racist. A lot of people indicate that it's because of the color of his skin. That may be why he may have been treated differently if the cop thought that he might have been a threat, but that does not mean that he was racist. One thing that you need to know in this incident that occurred, and his tragic death that occurred on Monday, and everybody does need to remain calm. Before you can declare somebody a racist, you have to look at their history. Does it demonstrate that he treated all blacks this way? Now, this particular officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck, it has recently been brought out that he had 18 complaints against him for excessive force. One was against a Hispanic. One incident, he even shot an Indian, a Native American. But unless details can come out that he treated only minorities that way, because we don't have all the details, and out of the 18 complaints, he was only disciplined in 2 of them. So, and it's also important to know that the restraint move that he used, the knee on the neck, is a restraint that is condoned by the police department. Now, there have been doctors and specialists that said that that sort of move can cause death as a result of what is called positional asphyxia, where you can get enough air to speak or gasp, but your breathing is still compromised. And I think that's what has happened here. But we have to remain calm until all evidence comes out, until this cop's history is further examined before we just say it's racist. We have to dig deeper to find out about it. Was George Floyd's death tragic? Did it have to occur? No. Should these officers, especially Officer Calvin, I believe is his name, should he have been charged with manslaughter? Absolutely. Because if it would have been any other ordinary citizen, we would have left that scene in handcuffs. The way the whole situation was handled by the police department was handled horribly. It was handled horribly. So remain calm, wait until all the facts come out. Even his mother has pled and begged for calm. We have to in this situation.
You know, on that note, you know, when it came out on Wednesday, the first tape,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I got into some very heated conversations with people because the first tape came out. I look at the media this is a failure of media as well, because local media does not dig into the incidents and situations that are taking place in their communities. Now, you look at the situation, the tape came out from a private citizen, the tape comes out, the media, national media, they show 5 seconds of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, of an officer with his knee on top of the neck of an individual, a black individual, on the ground. The PIO of the police department comes out and says he resisted arrest. By that evening, more tapes come out from citizens. It shows that George, he gets out of his car, because at first he said he resisted arrest, and the next video shows.
Well, but you can even back up a little bit. They said that he was sitting on his car. He was actually in his car.
Inside of his car, exactly. Right. But they approached the car. They asked him to get out of the car.
Right.
He got out of the car. They put him in handcuffs. They walked him over to the side on the sidewalk, on the side of the building. They sat him down on the ground. He was very compliant.
Right.
He wasn't fighting. He wasn't doing anything. Didn't look intoxicated. Didn't look high on anything.
No.
Okay. The next tape shows from another angle. Shows him one officer helps him up, and they're going to put him into the car because obviously now they're going to arrest him for what they showed up for, the forgery, right? And then the next tape you see him, he's on the ground he's in handcuffs. He's on the ground with the cop's knee on his neck.
Now let me just stop you one quick time.
Okay.
You and I had this conversation off the air. Well, here's what concerns me about that break right there when Mark was talking about that he was lifted up off the ground and taken to the police car to put inside because obviously he was going to be arrested. In the video, there's a police car that's right there. Now, they walk him across the street to the other side. Mm-hmm. To me, that's concerning and disconcerting because it's almost like it was purposely done so it can be away from the camera view, because where they initially stopped him at and set him on the ground, there's literally a camera right there which appears to be within 5 feet, so it's clear what they were doing. So, Mark, you go ahead and pick it up from there.
Well, exactly. So we haven't seen exactly, how would you say, the how he was put onto the ground or anything else. There's no tape of that one
No,
yet.
there isn't.
But essentially, from the moment the officers showed up, George was compliant.
Right.
Okay, didn't resist arrest.
No.
Didn't fight him. Didn't look high. It looked like maybe he screwed up. Was trying to forge a check. What? We don't even know that.
No, we don't.
We have no clue. But the issue is, and this is what all chief of police have come out across the nation. There's absolutely no reason. Okay, if suspect is compliant and he's handcuffed to do what they did.
Right.
That's what it boils down to. But we had a conversation over the phone, and we determined the date. That happened on Monday.
Correct.
The incident happened on Monday.
Right.
The tapes come out on Wednesday. Okay. This is where I start getting concerned about media. I start getting concerned about institutionalized racism, where this particular police department is pushing things under the carpet.
Right. Oh, yeah.
No wonder why the community is so pissed off. There's no excuse for the rioting and the looting of the stores and the burning down of a building and everything else, an AutoZone or whatever it was.
The Target.
And Target. Yeah, there's no excuses for that.
No.
However, you can understand, okay, 2 days, nothing happens. The guy gets arrested, he gets killed. They cart him off, okay, he's dead. What's going on?
Right.
So you can understand this because that community, based on the history now that's come out about that particular police department,
right,
whether they're doing strong arm tactics of crime,
right,
who knows what it is, but obviously this particular officer has a multitude of complaints about abuse of force, excessive force. The department itself, they came out and said one of the officers under this chief of police, one of the officers showed up to work with a white power insignia on his uniform.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, that came out today. So you hear these things, and obviously this police force has got some issues going on. So obviously the community is tied into that.
Right.
Because if this is happening, it's happening, and the community knows it.
Yeah, it is. And as a matter of fact, one of the other officers that was on the scene, Tun Thao,
Right.
there was a lawsuit that was filed against him, against a Hispanic,
Right.
where the gentleman was walking back home with his grandmother. Tun Thao stopped him for no reason, handcuffed him, beat him, broke his teeth,
Yeah.
and the city ended up selling for $25,000. And he got disciplined, didn't get fired, didn't get arrested, but he got disciplined.
Those are the incidents
Right.
that the community knows of.
Right,
So when George gets killed, right, and he got killed, he was killed.
right, he was.
Okay. When he gets killed and the community sees that nothing is happening, the mother is devastated, his wife is devastated, his community, his brother is devastated, everybody's devastated. I'd be devastated.
Sure.
If it was my brother or my son or my significant other, it died by a cop because he was, my significant other was forging a check, let's say, right, for the conversation part of it.
A $20 check, by the
$20
way.
check, and he gets killed by the cops. I'd be pissed off. I'd be shooting a cop.
Right.
That's how upset I would be.
Right.
Not that I would do it. Okay, that's how upset I'd be. So it's understandable. But then you look at, like I said, media,
And the
When-
sensationalization
the
of it.
sensationalization of it, where they
Right.
take a 7 to 8 minute tape, they take out 5 seconds of it of him pleading for his life, okay, and that's what they put out on there.
Hey, it sells news.
It sells, and this is the irresponsibility of our national news media at this point in time,
Right.
and it's pathetic.
No,
At
and-
this point, it's pathetic.
Yeah.
And as the district attorney, not district attorney, the U.S. Attorney General came out today and said, well, we have to prove that a crime had taken place. Well, let me tell you something. If there isn't a law on the book that makes that a crime what took place, then they need to create the law and name it after him.
Yeah, they
So
need
that way, if it ever happens again, immediately, like you or I,
Right.
if we got into a fight on the street and our opponent died, we'd be arrested immediately for manslaughter. So if there's some kind of veil that protects him because he's a cop, then a law needs to be passed immediately
right.
and name it after him. So that way, if it happens again, that cop, an unjustified use of force,
Right.
is going to get handcuffed on the scene and hauled away.
That's what.
And I'm pro-cop. My family are cops.
Oh, I know that. Right.
Okay, and so it's like, no, I hate to say it. It really upsets me. Not because he's black either, just because he's a human being.
Yeah, because there
Nobody
was
deserves that. If it was a female, if it was a white dude, whatever. Who gives a flying flea flick?
I agree.
Okay,
100%.
It's a human being, and just because he tried to forge a check, because you're in the middle of this COVID virus thing, and we're watching the abuse of force of our government right now, telling us we can't work, don't worry about it, we'll give you a couple bucks, stay home, do all this crap. There's an abuse of force of authority going on across the United States, and it's a tinderbox.
And I'm going to tell you something really crazy too. Two real quick things. Like I
Okay.
said, that move is actually approved. It's discouraged, but it's approved.
You mean
specific.
putting the knee on the neck,
Right, but
not when they're in handcuffs.
No. What I'm saying is what the counsel you just said. I'm sorry.
The Attorney General.
Attorney General. What he said is, we have to make sure that he was not resisting arrest, and that's when that move is approved. You can clearly see in the video he was not resisting arrest. But when you're talking about crime and stuff, and this man lost his life over $20. And this is one reason I don't like Gavin Newsom. I know I'm going abroad a little bit.
Right.
Do you know in San Francisco, you can steal up to less than $500, go into a store, fill a basket, walk out with it. They can't call the police. The police
Right.
are precluded from prosecuting because of the COVID-19 people are desperate to eat.
Right.
Talk about disparities. Anyway.
All right. Anyways, we're going to go on to break here, and when we come back, we're going to have Dr. Nordella, Jeffrey Nordella, on the line. He is going to give us an update about the Porter Ranch gas leak and the things that are going on there. He's going to give us his knowledge and expertise on the COVID virus and also talk about the hydrochloroquine as a treatment. He attended the University of California, San Diego, and received a bachelor's of science in human biology, attended the University of California of Los Angeles School of Medicine, receiving a medical I can't see here because it's so thin, but doctoral degree, internship, and residency at UCLA Hospital, and clinics in both family medicine and emergency medicine. He has over 30 years of practicing primary care physician. So on the other side of the break, should have Dr. Nordella back on it. Welcome back to the Voice of Reason. We have online with us now Dr. Jeffrey Nordella. Welcome again to the Voice of Reason, Dr. Nordella.
Hey, Dr. Nordella.
Thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I've stayed away from the corona and the virus too. So, but you know, this is a crazy times, and you know, I wanted to because it's welcome back because you've been on the show once before, and we were talking about the really important gas blowout in the North San Fernando Valley in Porter Ranch. And I would like you to give us a little bit of an update of what's happening specifically towards the denial of the subpoena to the gas company for their special sauce, of it. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
Yes, as a SOC, or the Scientific Oversight Committee member, we interface with the CAG, which is the Community Oversight Committee. But they had a public meeting, I want to say a couple of days ago, and I had been interfaced with the Department of Public Health and had suggested that not only do they need to subpoena the information for the CBC from Quest Diagnostics, but also subpoena the information so we can get, the exact chemicals that these poor people were exposed to. And of course, they've made verbal requests to the gas company, and the gas company has refused them, but they are not willing to file a subpoena, which is a few $100s. It is not involved in any litigation process. They're the Department of Public Health, and they have the right to get this information, because otherwise, how are we really going to efficiently do a $25 million health study with not having this information?
Right.
And the people were told basically that the Board of Supervisors has denied to move forward with this, which I think makes no sense to me whatsoever, and should have been addressed at the beginning of this lawsuit. And why this hasn't been done before, 4 years ago plus, is beyond my scientific logic.
Well, what is and I want to remind everybody out there, the County Board of Supervisors of the County of Los Angeles, political dynamic makeup is 4 Democrats, 1 Republican. And the 1 Republican, Catherine Barger, is the county supervisor of where that gas blowout was at. And what excuse is the County Board of Supervisors using for not subpoenaing the information?
Well, according to this meeting, it was client attorney privilege, which again makes no sense to myself, and actually spearheaded a little question in my mind, is that maybe it was part of the consent decree. But I went in and read it, and I actually find just the opposite. Now, I'm not an attorney, but in my opinion, I think there's numerous verbiage clauses in there that would allow the Department of Public Health to move forward and file the subpoena and not violate the consent decree. So beyond that, I mean, it's all speculatory. So we really don't want to go off into that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it's kind of funny because based on the coronavirus, we've been able to shut down the entire economy. We've been able to sequester everybody in their homes. We've been able to order people to get masks. and social distancing and everything else under the sun. But yet you have the number one gas blowout and the largest gas blowout in U.S. history, environmental disaster affecting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And this is not considered some kind of a medical emergency to deal with?
You would think.
I would think.
And especially, with withholding such crucial information, which is for the betterment of the public good. And that should far outweigh what privilege, as shaky as it is, that they're trying to assert.
Yeah, so the analogy would be is, I spent a lot of years in the emergency room, is like, having a child overdose and having the parent know what the chemicals are, but yet won't release to the pills that the child overdosed on. And obviously that makes the job much more difficult. And
right.
Obviously one would not think too much of that parent. It's kind of the same situation here. Why this wasn't addressed by these minds at the Department of Public Health and all of the other regulators that, we need the chemicals.
Yeah, this has been going on for almost 5 years now, and you would have thought, and within the first year, that they would have requested that information and sought it through the courts.
Absolutely.
And now, the next question I want to dive into is, pertaining to, we're having another health. That obviously, because we covered it quite well in the first episode that you were here, and we discussed all the things about Porter Ranch and the gas leak and the health hazards and the health implications that were going on with the young adults, the children, and people that already have healthcare issues and so forth. Now, with the COVID virus that's come out, how devastating is it to people who have now had their health compromised by sucking in these chemicals into their lungs?
Well, it's really difficult to say because we can't get out the information. And this is the second issue of the lack of the subpoena power that Department of Public Health has, is to file it against Quest Diagnostics. But again, they refuse to do such. Again, I do not understand. You're dealing with children, and it has been stated to me that, they're concerned about relationships between the labs. And my point was that, the health of the children of the community
right.
should supersede any relationship you have with the lab or future relationships. And you are the Department of Public Health. You have that power and that authority to exercise. And certainly you could do it very, politically savvy. But if they refuse, then you have to take that next step to show the support to the people of the community that has been exposed.
Now, let me ask you a question. With everything and the exposure that occurred out in Porter Ranch, and we talked about that extensively when you were here, if I recall correctly, there were a lot of people in the community that were adversely affected that developed upper respiratory problems. And that's one of the underlying issues that the COVID-19 virus attacks. So do you have any information put together? Has anybody done a study to indicate the number of people that in the Porter Ranch community that caught or contracted the COVID-19 virus and that had already sustained upper respiratory problems as a result of the gas leak?
And your question is a good one. Because of the inhalation issues and injuries that is multifactorial, but a lot of these chemicals and the effect of the immune system, as Mr. Reed brought up, is the fact is that are the patients in this community more susceptible and will then do worse and march through this virus, which we can talk about in a second. But nobody that I know has done a study. I would love to be able to do one, but again, it's getting the people together and then getting the funds to do the study is certainly a difficult task.
Yeah, they talk about contact tracing and tracking of individuals, and I think that it would almost behoove on a study aspect of all of the people who have moved out of Porter Ranch to other areas, if any of them have contacted the COVID-19 and how it's affected them as well.
Right.
Because a lot of people just gave up and moved out. Yes, there's a lot of people who are still there, but at the same time, the percentage of people that have moved out of the area because of the lack of response by the County Board of Supervisors, by the Health Department of Los Angeles, and so forth, they were not getting anywhere, and they refused to continue living there. So I would be very interested in a study of numbers of individuals who have suffered from the COVID-19 and how it's affected them different than anybody else.
And I think an additive point to that is that in March of 2016, between March and November, they did the GIS-HEAL study, which actually lays out and factually found that there's fugitive admissions.
Right.
So it's not just that they were exposed at the blowout. The issue was there prior exposure, then the blowout, and then post-exposure.
Right.
And if there are fugitive admissions, this is chronically going on. And it concerns me to the status of their immune system. Mm-hmm. And then that would lead to the question, again, are you more susceptible and will you do worse if you contract the virus? These are unknowns right now that I'd love to be able to address.
Well, I think for the community and pertaining to additive charges of criminal complaint and also civil complaints, that if they contracted it and had a more difficult time with the COVID because of the inhalation of these particular chemicals, I would want that data myself.
Absolutely.
I think any good attorney really would too if they were going after civil damages to make these individuals that live in the area whole once again.
And even the first responders.
Yeah, without a doubt, the first responders. Because at this point, I know that the Porter Ranch Sempura Gas and Southern California Gas Company now has that facility back up, I believe, to 85% capacity. And they're going to go for 100% capacity. I know that a couple of weeks ago, there was over 100 phone calls of massive gas smell going on in the area. And they tried to pass it off as fugitive emissions coming from somewhere else to the area, and from the ocean, basically. And that's such a crock. I mean, it went up into the stratosphere, flew over the Santa Monica Mountains, through over the San Fernando Valley, and then dove straight down into Chatsworth and in Porter Ranch and Northridge. I mean,
that's right up there with radon emissions from rocks causing cancer.
Yes. I mean, so
one very interesting point that I did learn from reading the consent decree is that the methane monitor line that in the settlement is supposed to be set up, which has not been addressed and is certainly not active to my knowledge today,
right.
Set levels of reporting at 10 parts per million of methane. Now, fugitive emissions are really above 2.2. So why is there such a gap between reporting at 10 and 2.2? So a level of 5. They've also shown by AQMD literature that there's really no correlation of the methane benzene, and benzene is the one you care about.
Right.
So if you had a benzene level of 4, you could still have a toxic level of benzene. So why set it at 10? I don't understand that.
Well, they don't want to be caught with their pants down, and I think that everybody in the entire community that's still there fighting the good fight,
right?
Because, like I say, it's been almost 5 years now, and this is a typical conflict resolution of big entities over population, and that is as the population either moves out, gets tired, and the energy shifts, and they no longer pursue it. And at this point in time, I think that everybody is finally figured it out, that the County Board of Supervisors isn't on their side. There are state assemblymen in the area, state senators in the area are not on their side. The congressman that I'm up against is not on their side either, because they've played the circle jerk game for quite a long time now, and nothing's happened. And the facility is going to be up and running at full capacity. We're going to go to break, and when we come back from break, we're going to talk about the COVID-19 virus, how it affects the body, how it migrates into the body and takes over the body's immune system, and what the vulnerabilities are and who is vulnerable. And Dr. Nordell and I have had a prior conversation, and it's going to be a fascinating one because it's very in-depth. So put your ears on, get yourself a cup of tea, and sit down, hang on, because you haven't heard this information from anywhere else. See you at the other end of the ad.
One hell of a ride.
My erstwhile opponent says I don't accept debate invitations. I accept the League of Women Voters invitation.
The League of Women Voters LA chapter was the one who invited him to the 5 debates with the Battered Women's Organization, with a synagogue, 2 churches, and the American Legion. And he turned down them all flat with the League of Women Voters.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice you can rely on, it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110, churchandlaw.com. A law firm you can trust and count on.
Welcome back to the Voice of Reason. We have Dr. Nordella online with us for his protection. And I don't say my protection. I'm not as worried about things as most people are. If you're coughing and sneezing around me, I definitely get my distance away from you, wash my hands, and stay away. But Dr. Nordella, welcome back to the other end of the advertisement. I would like you to give a kind of an in-depth description of what is this COVID-19 virus, how it affects the body, because in our conversations, you've read over 150 different studies. You pretty well know this virus like the back of your hand. And these are studies that have been done in France, they've been done in Italy. There are studies that are not available here in the U.S., but you have taken the time to really to get to know this virus intimately. So tell us about the virus. What are the facts? How do people get it? How is it transmitted? How does it get into the body? And what does it do to the body?
Okay.
That's a tall order. I'm sitting back with my cup of coffee now.
I'm looking for a lot of meat on that bone.
Yeah, you better grab a cup of tea yourself.
Exactly. But let's try to condense it, because when we're listening to the county health department and stuff, they really don't give us the information. And I think that people are really driven by fear right now. They're scared to death of this thing. They don't know because there's been so much false information. At first, it was very highly transmittable. It stayed on surfaces for hours and days and everything else. And now they came out with the last one that you really can't get it from surfaces. And so I would like to kind of just very succinctly, what is this virus? How is it transmitted? Who's most susceptible? What are the first signs of getting it? You know the order here.
How it attacks the body.
Yeah, succinct your brain and let's get it out.
So a virus, you have to think of it as just a non-living particle. It is a capsule, and it has either DNA or RNA, depending on the viral type. This viral type is an RNA virus. And what that means is that it needs your cells, your body cells. It has to enter your cells, and it uses your cellular machinery to re-replicate itself in the hundreds to thousands, causes the cell to die so these new virons can be released and go out into the environment and infect others.
Right.
So there's 2 mechanisms by which this virus specifically, it's very unique in that it attacks a lot of organ systems. It enters the cell through what they call a receptor. So you have in your nasal passage, in your throat, in your respiratory tract, and other organ systems, you have a protein that is on your cell membranes. And that, just to make it easy, it's called ACE2, and angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, that the little spikes on the protein that you see actually will bond to those receptors. And when it does, it opens a door and it allows the virus to enter the cell. Then the virus uses, again, your DNA and chemicals within yours and goes through a process of replication, packages itself, and again causes the cells to lyse or open and then spreads the virus. So if you look at how it attacks you one of 2 ways. One is mainly the respiratory tract. There is another modality in entering the body is through the GI tract. And there's a GI component of this virus will cause nausea, vomiting, fever, so forth and so on. But if the virus attacks your upper airways, gets into the nasal cavity or the throat, it will then migrate down into the pulmonary tissue. And in the pulmonary tissue, you have a lot of ACE2 receptors as well. So it can destroy tissue on its basic invasion, okay, and kill off cells. But the other unique thing is that this virus seems to do is in your immune system, you have a response. And the response, let's just say, has to be appropriate. So cells talk to other cells through chemicals, and those chemicals are called cytokines.
Right.
So in order to mount a defense against this virus, your cytokines are kind of in check. So they need to be released, they need to communicate, antibodies need to be made, so forth and so on. But this virus seems to, and in particular individuals that have risk factors, they get into what they call a cytokine storm. And when you get into a cytokine storm, the cytokines itself had triggered the immune system to attack your tissue and actually kill it. So this is the second killing or damaging mechanism it creates. It goes to via the blood. When it becomes bloodborne, it goes and attacks the heart and attacks kidneys and attacks other organ systems.
Wow.
So you're left with a lot of damage. And then obviously when it attacks the lungs, you go into a syndrome called ARDS. Now it's recently found that it also attacks the endothelial tissue of blood vessels, and actually then you can form interarterial clots. These clots, if they're in the lung, are called pulmonary embolus. Right. And these are the patients that don't do well on ventilators because you ventilate them with the oxygen, but the blood flow does not flow to the pulmonary tissue or the lungs to capture the oxygen that's coming through because it has a big clot or a blockage. And these people end up passing from it. Now, very interesting, a couple of things you can look at is that when it's usually in the upper respiratory tract, the viral load, which is a term we use, is very small. So that basically is how many viral particles do you have? When it drops into the deeper pulmonary tissue, the viral load actually increases, and they actually have an assay they can test your blood, and it's called RNA anemia. And what that does is that measures your viral load. It's those patients that have high viral loads that correlate and go into cytokine storm. And there's one chemical marker that's very interesting. It's called interleukin 6. And that seems to be well correlated with the severity of illness. There's other markers such as C-reactive protein and other markers, but very deep to go into it here. So in that path, it takes time for this virus to ramp up. So if it starts with one or two viruses in the nasal cavity, but then, replicates by whatever logarithmic scale it does, you end up with a large viral load. It correlates to your illness and your sickness and how well you will do. Now, the risk factors, you stratify the risk factors. The two highest risk factors they know of right now are male and obesity, having what they call a Basmati index of greater than 30. And that can be calculated. You can go on Google, you look at your height and your weight, and you'll get a number. But those are the high risk factors. Now, there's numerous other risk factors from diabetes, high triglycerides, heart disease, hypertension, pulmonary disease. All of these are also risk factors to doing poorly. But you look at the children and they ask questions of like why they don't get this illness as aggressively. There is a sub-illness in this. They're finding out now that it's like a Kawasaki syndrome. But the issue is the ACE2 receptors aren't as highly prevalent in the nasal epithelium or the throat, or for that matter, the body. So we look at this and we say, here's what we really want to do with this virus, is that we want to be able to, any physician should want to be able to treat the patients and make them better. Now, if you get a flu-like syndrome, that's okay. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to be 65 and older and go into an ICU and be placed on a ventilator, because that has been quoted in the literature of having about a 97% mortality.
Right.
So if there's something I can do to help the patients prior, not receiving it with the hand washes, social distancing, the mask, so forth and so on, that's obviously the best bet. But if you're going to get it, what else can we do to help you not get as sick? And one of the first things is you have to look at some of these inflammatory, pro-inflammatory bodies, markers in the body, which you can do through a blood test. And then you have to get down. But weight management, control of your diabetes, control of your blood pressure, control of your hyperlipidemia syndromes, all of these absolutely needs to be done. So I hope I answered the first part of the question of how it enters the body.
You did. So on a layman's terminology, is this by people sneezing in the air? Is it by touching surfaces? Is it the lack of washing hands? What does the common layperson do in a daily activity? Is the CDC right about, constantly washing your hands? You don't touch your face. You put the mask on when you're around people. What is now boiled down to the actual protocol? What is the most effective protocol to prevent yourself from getting it when you're out in the general public?
Right.
Well, if I'm out in the general public, I do wear a mask. And if I go into a higher risk area, such as I work at the seeing patients at the county health, I do gloves. Right. I also wear a white coat when I come home. Everything goes off prior to entering the home, and then shower, wash my hair, so forth and so on, because it's difficult to really ascertain how one picks it up. And the reason is that if you get inoculated in the nose, the question is how much virus is in the nose?
Right.
So when you sneeze, how far do you spread it? Are you sneezing indoors where it's stagnant? Or are you, sneezing on your porch or outside on a windy day? All of these things are going to lessen it. But I think until we know, which I don't think we ever will, it's just follow a common cold type of prescription. If you don't want a common cold, you don't sit in close quarters with somebody and have them sneeze, or, the number two way that viruses are passed by the common cold are actually through Kleenexes or even kitchen towels. So you just have to be careful. You keep the people, out of the home, at least for right now, until we really know. But these are good preventative issues, as well as tuning up your health.
That is a primary one.
Vitamin D is excellent. Vitamin C is excellent for immunity.
Right.
And doing these few things aside from then taking medications, which we can talk about if you wish.
That's going to be the last segment.
We can get into that. But I think those are just the smart, common things with common sense to do.
I've put it in a kind of more of a visual for people. I've asked them, would you put your tongue on a toilet seat? And they're like, oh, God, no. And I said, well, then wash your hands when you get down in the bathroom.
Right.
Would you put your tongue on a handrail out in the general public? And they're like, oh, God, no. And I said, well, then what? You don't put your hands in your mouth when you're walking around outside. Mm-hmm. And you say those in a very visual, because I think people touch their face 9 times through the day without even knowing it.
Right.
And so people need to be very cognizant of what they're doing, especially in this point in time, and understand that washing your hands, and washing your hands, from what I've understood, is because the actual virus, it is encapsulated in a fatty tissue, or it's a fatty membrane or whatever. I'm not a doctor, so I don't come up with the right terminology, but I know that that's the reason why soap is utilized, because it breaks it down and it kills the virus. That's why you use soap for 20 seconds on your hands, right?
Well, actually, the capsule that the virus is in is usually protein. Mm-hmm. And the soap actually is an emulsifier that basically it allows the water to be more efficient in the washing process.
Okay.
So it's really, not a disinfectant. I could go into it, but it'd be way advanced, but the osmotic gradients and so forth and so on of pulling fluid in and out of the thing and destroying the capsule. Over time, that will happen anyways.
Right.
But I think the one point I'd like to bring up is that the surgical mask is okay.
Right.
It is not the best. The surgical mask basically prevents you, if you had it, from spreading it. And masks are, it's filter and fit. Those are the two key issues with it. So the filtering process of a surgical mask is certainly less than the N95 mask.
Right.
The N95 mask has a thicker filter. It's tortuous. It allows and it traps better the particles.
Right.
And they would be the one. Plus, you also look at the surgical mask, and they tint on the side of the face, and so they're not as efficacious as an N95. I wish that we could get N95s for all the healthcare workers and the first responders, and the first line of defense on this.
So do I. We're gonna go to our final break, and on the other side of the break, Dr. Nordella and us. If anybody wants to call in, they can call in. But if any, we're on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about some of the treatments that have been looked at. We're going to dispel a few of them. One of the main ones that everybody has heard about is hydroxychloroquine, and with the Z-Pak. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss some of the other ones that are up and coming and how they look. So on the other end of it, we'll see you.
My erstwhile opponent says I don't accept debate invitations. I accept the League of Women Voters invitation.
The League of Women Voters LA chapter was the one who invited him to the 5 debates with the Battered Women's Organization, with a synagogue, 2 churches, and the American Legion. And he turned down them all flat with the League of Women Voters. Welcome back to the Voice of Reason. Welcome back, Dr. Nordella, and thank you for staying on this entire episode, basically for the 3 segments of this. And it's very important information as far as I'm concerned. Now, there's over 950 trials of treatments and vaccines that are taking place now via the government. Mm-hmm. But yet we have one that everybody seems to be hearing about the most, and it's been dispelled, it's been promoted. The President of the United States was taking the hydroxychloroquine without the Z-Pak because he doesn't have it yet. He's been taking it for 10 days. Everybody first was saying, why aren't you taking it? And when he said, he is taking it, they say, why are you stealing the hydroxychloroquine from somebody who needs it, and so forth. I would like you to kind of address that whole phenomena of what's happening with a drug that's over 40 years old. It has been proven safe in non-hospital circumstances and has been prescribed for years for people with lupus and other issues. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Hydroxychloroquine basically has very positive in vitro studies that they looked at in Petri dish, basically.
Right.
And it works very well. The theory is that it dilates up canals. It allows the zinc ion to go from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, which then inhibits the machinery of the virus to replicate and stops the propagation. That's one of the biggest effects it has. It also binds to the S subunit on the capsule of the virus. When it does that, it takes up those spots and acts as an antagonist, so it cannot bind to the ACE2 receptors and get into the cell in the first place.
Right.
New mechanism that it can't. Well, first of all, the other thing is that we know from the rheumatoid patients and the lupus patient, it does control the cytokines. It is a disease modifier. So it does help in that aspect for that second part of how the virus destroys the body. And the last one is it's now been discovered that it has antiplatelet effects. So these people that have the endothelial damage and thin clot formation,
right,
it inhibits and gives some protection to those patients. So in theory, it works very well, and I know there's a lot of controversy around it. And there was an article that just actually came out today by an epidemiologist from Yale, and he put it together very nicely.
That's the one you sent. That's the one you sent me today,
studies,
right?
Right.
There's 5 positive studies, 2 with controls.
Right.
They're done two in France, 2 in New York, and 1 in Brazil. And it has a total cohort of treated with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin of about 2,000 patients. And then we'll talk a bit about how many cardiac effects has this had, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But very positive results. And what we don't want to do is we don't want that patient to get super sick, have to go into the emergency room, have to be admitted to the hospital, have to be admitted to the ICU, and then placed on a ventilator. So that's the path that these patients can go on. What we want to do is inhibit that. So very, very, very important is early treatment with this medication has been shown to be successful.
Right,
Okay.
because I think the study that I took a look at that you sent indicated that if the patients that are diagnosed with COVID-19 get it, the hydrochloroquine with the azithromycin within 4 days of diagnosis, that the results are extremely positive.
Yes, and I'd like to say it's actually there's the one study in Brazil, I believe, that showed if they got treated in less than 7 days, they still had statistically significant outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can treat them within a couple of days of 48 hours, like if you go read the insert of Tamiflu is an anti-influenza.
Oh, right.
It tells you in the insert that you need to use this medication within 48 hours to have it be its most efficacious effects and outcomes of stopping the virus. This
Right.
is no different. So very important that I think people understand that. And then we look at the risk of the medications. And it was, first of all, a couple of facts in doing this. It just absolutely kind of blew me away. We write in the United States in 2017, we wrote 5.6 million prescriptions of 60 a day on average of hydroxychloroquine. That came out to 336 million tabs for patients with RA and lupus. And RA and lupus, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, they take it every day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's number one. Azithromycin, okay? We wrote 15.1 million scripts at six total tablets. It's 9,060,000. That drug has been around since 1991.
Right.
And the hydroxychloroquine has been around since 1945. There has never been any controversy or statements or whatever, even though there is a black box warning on it that it can prolong the QT segment, which is classified as a cardiac side effect. But again, the one we worry about the most is with the QT segment, can people go into a malignant arrhythmia and die? And the percentage is incredibly small looking at all of these numbers. Now, don't forget, there's a lot of patients around that take hydroxychloroquine for their rheumatoid arthritis. Do they ever get tracheal bronchitis? Sure they do. I've treated hundreds of patients, and I put them on Z-Pak. So they've taken that combination. A great other point is that the half-life on hydroxychloroquine, depending on who you read, is an average of 30 days. So it takes about 75 days, 60 to 75 days to get to a point where the drug is therapeutic. How long do we take it and we treat patients with this? 5 days. So what is the amount that you're really going to get in the serum at 5 days versus the worried patients over here at 60 to 75 days, the higher serum level? So that considered, to me, the risk, there was another study that actually came out a little while ago from Oxford that looked at the risk of them together, being that they're additive and not a multiple of one another.
Right.
And basically said that the adding of the azithromycin did not increase the risk of the QT segments at all.
Right.
So on that basis, when we look today, and we have 100,000 deaths in the United States, it's projected conservatively on a model that by the time we get the results back from the trials or a vaccine, we will have doubled our death rate. Another 100,000, and that's conservative. Some are up to 200,000. So the question is, if we have something that we can treat early, and let me just say this, is that you don't want to treat a cancer patient at stage 4. You'd like to treat them at stage 1. It's just common sense because
Right.
the outcome most likely would be better. Why do we want to wait? And all of the negative studies on hydroxychloroquine are all inpatient. Inpatient, viral load is greater, cytokine storm is started, and really not too much is going to stop that, even the remdesivir. But you have a better shot with the remdesivir than, again, and I would not recommend that even hydroxychloroquine it be treated inpatient. It would be more so early diagnosis, early treatment for success.
And that makes sense.
So the president taking the, and duly noted, all of us, have a complicated time listening to our president at times, and I know you do too. And the politicization of the medication has been horrid. But, he came out and finally, it notified the public that he had been taking hydroxychloroquine for as a preventative.
Right.
Because, some of the people in his staff in the motor pool actually came down with it, and he sees quite a few people still. So if you're taking that, it would prevent you then essentially from getting it, or if your system does get it, it's going to knock it down fast then, right?
Well, the study I want to see come out is I want them to do a retrospective study on a chart review on all of the patients that went into the hospital and did poorly, either with death or just hospitalization. I want to see how many of those patients had the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, and how many of those patients were on hydroxychloroquine. That will address the question for you, I think, very quickly. Because if the rates on those patients are very minimal, they are on it every day. So that's important. There was a study that came out of India that looked at 7,000, frontline people that were exposed to the virus, healthcare workers, that they did put on preventative, and 0 of them received the COVID-19, contracted the virus.
No,
so again, initial studies and needs to be looked at more, but I would be very encouraged to take it.
Well, when you indicated that they would put on preventative medication, was it the hydroxychloroquine that they would put on? Okay. Yeah. And
then, just the last question I think everybody needs to ask themselves is, when you go to the doctor and they say, look, here's the risk and the benefits, and the patient always should turn around and say, well, what would you do, doctor? I think that's so important, because the patients that look at this right now, and if they can't look at it with untainted eyes, it might put them into a category, either scaring them or whatever, so they wouldn't take this. Would they get ill and possibly pass from not doing something like this? That's a concern to me. So again, the question is, if you get sick, if you have this virus in spike temp and have a little bit of shortness of breath and maybe a viral pneumonia, would you be willing to take hydroxychloroquine and azithro? Or an alternative is hydroxychloroquine now and doxycycline.
Right.
But all of these need to be taken with zinc. It is more efficacious with the 3 than either one of the medications.
My final question, before we get about 30 seconds here, my final question is how are the insurance companies responding to the request by doctors for hydroxychloroquine, the Z-Pak, for the treatment of individuals early on? Are they receptive to it, or are they blocking it?
I don't think the insurance companies, and I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is that for the small amount of money, hydroxychloroquine is dirt cheap, and so is Z-Pak.
Right.
I would say if it can keep them out of the hospital, that's a money saver for them. And if they push back on that, I would not understand their logic.
Absolutely. Dr. Nordella, I want to thank you once again for coming back onto our show. I think it's been extremely informative, and I've enjoyed the knowledge. A lot of times it's way up and over my head, but that's why you went to school for as many years as you've got, and you've practiced for 30 years as well. You know this like the back of your hand, and there's things I know like the back of my hand that you don't know, but it's been very, very, very informative, and I'm very appreciative of you coming onto the show and sharing your knowledge with everybody out there. Again, thank you to everybody for tuning in to another show of The Voice of Reason. Share the show with your friends. We have a Facebook page up now called Voice of Reason, which has all of the shows in the archives. Ted, why don't you bring it on home?
I thank you again, Dr. Nordella, for being on the show and sharing the information. for the listening audience, this is what this show is about. It's about civil discourse. It's about imparting knowledge and talking about the subjects that the media just doesn't talk about, but we do. Because here, we all know ignorance prevails when rational minds sit back and do nothing. Be sure to tune in next week.
Bye-bye. Another good show in the can.
Another great show.